Watson here. Look, if you want me to say writing on air from Chapel FM, I'll say it.
So, good afternoon and welcome to Chapel FM Arts Centre. You're listening to Day 7 of Writing on Air 2024. We were just talking about the sheer variety of programmes, sheer variety of takes on the theme of recovery this last 7 days or so. And we're going to carry on with that now. If you're walking down the street at this very moment and you fancy popping into a workshop, there's one happening in a minute, a sounding the word music workshop happening all afternoon, and here live in Radio Theatre we have something very special indeed. Museum of Relics.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Tony Macaluso, director here at Chapel FM Arts Centre, and very proud to happy to have a guest who's come over from Italy and is joining us here, first time visiting Leeds and Seacroft and Chapel FM Arts Centre. So all of next year we're going to be exploring all kinds of global connections, but of course at Chapel FM we're always exploring global connections. We're here grounded in Seacroft, but we're always connected to the wider world. And I've had the good fortune of spending quite a bit of time over the last few decades in a little town in Italy called a very beguiling, enchanting bookstore with a wonderful glow and an energy about it, and literature, among other things. Literature can be bait. You don't just debate literature. Literature is bait. And it drew me in, and I struck up a conversation with the bookseller. And then I was back a year or two later and browsing bookstores and came across this book that I'm holding up called Compro libri anche in grandi quantità. I buy books also in big quantities, in grand quantities. And it turned out that the author of that, and it was a book about buying used books and bringing books back to life and having them circulate back through society. And it turned out that the author of the book was the same person who ran this utterly charming little bookstore. So I somehow made the connection and struck up a conversation. And here we are a few years later, and Giovanni is here with us in Leeds to talk about both his book, but also his journeys bringing books back to life, recovering books, and also the strange objects that exist within the covers of books. For the first part of this, just to kind of set the mood and let our radio audience ease in, we're going to hear a little bit of music quietly in the background, I think, this Amidio Clemente music. And so, Giovanni, first of all, welcome to the radio here on East Leeds Community Radio.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Yes, and you had a bit of an epic journey, you and your wife, Raffaella, yesterday, getting here.
Quite of a nightmare. I mean, it lasted like 36 hours from our hometown to Leeds because we lost flights and stuff. And then, well, that's okay. Now we're here. I'm very happy to be here with you, Tony.
Yes, very good. So, so this music that's playing in the background. Let's give the audience. Let it set the tone a bit here. This is a musician called Amidio Clemente.
Amidio Clemente. Yeah.
Yes,
it's
and
from the region I come from, Emilia-Romagna, in the north of Italy.
Yes, and so you've been a bookseller. How long have you been a bookseller for now? How long have you been in this
Since
business?
2010, so it's almost 15 years.
Yes. And so this voice playing, by the way, and this track that we're playing is by it's words of an Italian author, a fairly obscure Italian author, but one who deserves to be better known, named Emanuele Carnevale. And he, as a 20-year-old, got on a boat and traveled off to the United States of America and ended up becoming a fantastic English language poet.
Yeah, he left Italy in 1914 to New York, and then he started writing into the circle of poetry, which included William Carlos Williams and Ezra Pound and people like that. And he never wrote a single word in Italian. He just wrote in English, and he's a brilliant English writer.
So for listeners,
and this is a record about his work in English.
Very good. So, all right. So in your work, buying and selling books, there's lots of ways to approach bringing books back to life, recovering books, but you have, I think, a particular approach to how you regard books. And you, among other things, some bookstores, people just come in and they drop a bunch of books at a used bookstore and they get put on the shelves and get sold and so forth. But you get lots of strange messages that come sort of slipped under the door slot. It's like a Paul Auster novel where, you know, these strange messages arrive and then you're off on journeys to go and into people's houses, sometimes people who died, people who are moving for various reasons, people who are getting rid of their books and then they find their way into your shop. We'll get to your shop in a moment here, and then when you're unpacking these books, you have, as I think many people probably in these situations do, you sometimes find little legacies of the previous owner inside the covers, messages, photographs, objects slipped in between the covers. But at some point along the way, you started to create a kind of almost a museum of these objects, a museum of relics. And was there a particular object that got this project going for you, or something that jumped out, or was it something that emerged slowly over time, that you started just assembling these things?
Yeah, let's begin by saying that our bookstore is called Libri Risorti, which means resurrected books. And the first piece of paper I wanted to talk about is a piece of paper with a handwritten on it that says in French, "Je suis sorti de prison hier," which means "get out of prison yesterday."
We'll let the music fade and we'll bring out that first image here. Now, one of the things we love for radio listeners out there, we're going to describe these images. We've got 6 images, but each of them I think have their own very evocative backstory. And all of these were things that came out of books that you actually found. So this one is the one that sort of sets it all in motion here, written in French. So, and in this wonderful sort of lovely sort of, I don't know, tree branch-like script that someone had. Je suis sorti de prison hier.
Yeah.
So again, one more time for the radio listeners out there, what the message says word by word here.
I got out of prison yesterday.
Okay. So.
But the thing that it was interesting to me is that, as I said, the bookstore is called Libri Risorti. That's the word I want to point out. And the word sortir in French means to get out of something, to get out of a situation, to get out of a door. But it's connected with another word that in Italian is sortire, which means the same, to get out of something.
So to get out.
But also it is connected to the word sorte, which means destiny. And Libri Risorti is also connected because it's risorti, is risorgere, to resurrect, but it's also to get pulled out of death, to get pulled out of a situation of despair, maybe. And so I wanted to begin with this one because it's very significant from my point of view. So,
yeah, and this, and we've got Oscar here, by the way, who's a French speaker as well, right? I think this is a great place to start with because, you know, flipping through a used book. Do you remember what any guess at what book this came from? Any recollection? It's lost into the annals of time, but somewhere in some book,
I don't remember.
Finding this torn piece of paper, and you actually see the torn scrap of the paper there.
Well, I do remember the actual story, but I don't want to tell it.
Okay,
so.
all right, we'll keep that a secret for listeners there. But this mysterious person who's and no indication of who it was directed to, who it was, but it's just kind of floating there as this kind of lingering trace of a book's previous owner, a kind of a ghostly presence there.
Yeah, it's a destiny thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we have dealt with a huge collection of books that maybe, if it wasn't for us, could have been destroyed.
Yeah.
Or sold to people who didn't care about them, and they were dead basically. And we put them to another life. We gave them another life. So that's what we do.
And I know when talking with you at one time in the bookshop as well too, that you certainly have a sense too when people come into the bookshop. You particularly mentioned the idea of, say, young students who are there's that way of sort of browsing around where you can sort of tell that they're looking, they're searching, they're waiting. Again, if you think of literature as bait, right, for the right bait to become available and catch them, and you'll often see part of your role as to sort of gently swoop in, I suppose, and push the bait in front of somebody? Do you see that as or try to
I'm
find that?
I'm kind of grandmaster in the bookstore and fisherman. So literature, I think, as we discussed in the last few days, literature, I see it as a bait, as something that pulls you out of your own dimension, of your closed dimension, into something else. I mean, fish don't know to be into water. They don't realize that they live into water. So literature acts as a bait, not as a debate. I mean,
Yes.
you don't discuss with me in my own bookstore, because I'm the grandmaster, so...
Okay, so no debate, but bait.
No debate, just bait.
Okay, very nice. Okay, well, let's go to the next image. We will come back to the bookstore itself because there's a fantastic history about it. That building itself also being recovered in all sorts of ways that I think resonates a bit also with this place where we are right now, Chapel FM Art Center. Okay, so this is a photograph. And again, for radio listeners at home, we're going to conjure these up for you, although we'll have links for them as well. But so here we've got a black and white photograph.
1932.
1932, so we've got the exact year. And a woman posing in a mirror with one arm back. We see her both from the behind and the front because she's standing in front of a full-length armadio
in a nightgown.
Mirror, in a nightgown, with a look of, I don't know, a look of slight intoxication, of maybe listening to music, perhaps. We can only guess maybe what music might be playing. 1932 also means, in Italy, really kind of things were really changing in Italy in those years.
Opera.
Yeah, if it is, yeah, it could be opera, yeah. And so what drew you when you flipped through and found this image, and what sort of chain of associations when you recovered this object?
I found this picture in an envelope, but I don't remember the book exactly. But I like it because I don't see a picture, I just hear music and some kind of happiness because she's dancing in front of the mirror. And maybe it's a country house because you see the door, that's a door, not just a window.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And maybe the person who took the photograph is on the bed. And maybe they just had sex or something. And it's because she's very sensual.
Yeah.
But that's what I was saying. I hear music. That's what is enchanting about this image.
And a sense of kind of slight abandonment as well, and maybe glancing back at the person behind as well. Yes.
Yeah, it's a kind of game of glances, you know, like Velasquez kind of thing. Or Goya.
Yeah. Who's looking at who in it? So the bookstore itself, when we look at this image, because I think it's a good moment to think about this. So the bookstore itself is in a space that's been recovered, a building. We've done we've had some really good conversations this past week or so on Writing on Air about recovered buildings. We visited what's going to be the new future home of the National Poetry Center, which is in an old church that's hopefully going to be recovered and reborn. And then this space where we are ourselves, the chapel, is an 1874 chapel, 150 years old. It's been recovered, reborn as an art center, as a radio station, a theater, where we are right now. So this bookstore has a long and fascinating history as well.
It was built in the middle of the 18th century, and it was the first synagogue of my town. But the funny thing is that the chief rabbi of the synagogue was a bookseller. I didn't tell you this.
No.
I just discovered that he was one of the greatest booksellers in Europe in that century. And then it became a funeral house, and then a typewriter shop, and then a vintage shop, and then a bookstore.
Okay. So it's gone synagogue, funerals, typewriters, vintage, and bookstore. So there's somewhere in all of that, I don't know how you might put those all together into a kind of almost a wheel of fortune, kind of going from one thing, but all of that is, there's something about things dying and being reborn and brought back, and even the typewriter shop in the midst of it all.
It's all connected if you think about it.
Yeah.
Religion, the Jews, I mean, the people of the book.
Yeah.
Then death, then writing, and then books, finally.
Yeah. And did you know that when you moved into the space, the shop?
No, I discovered it during the years.
That's along the way, yeah. Okay, well, let's bring us to the next image here. Oh, sorry, the other direction here now for listeners at home. Okay, so now we get into a postcard. It's got a mix of Italian and German. So we're going to describe this for listeners at home, what we're seeing here. So you want to give it a first go of what we've got on the screen here?
You go.
Okay, I'll give a pass on it here. So we've got a postcard that's so in German, and but then at the top it says, well, it's got some French as well in there. So we've got correspondance de prisonnière, so it's a prison correspondence, right, of some kind. And then, but also, and the year on it is, and it's coming from Deutschland, from Germany, and it's got even I think it says censored as well, verificato, the censors. And the year is 1944, so April of 1944. So, and then we've got nom de camp, so we're talking about a camp, a prison camp, or even a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. So it's a postcard from a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Back to somebody. Okay.
And I was surprised at the beginning when I found it because it says Salzburg, but it also says Deutschland. But
Yes.
everybody knows that Salzburg is in Austria.
Yeah.
But at the time, Austria didn't exist anymore. So
Okay.
it was Germany.
Yeah.
And it's a postcard that the fascist regime gave to the relatives of prisoners, and they could write to their relatives. And this is a young wife writing to his young husband in the concentration camp, and she says that, I mean, she misses him, and she hopes that everything will be fine after the war. And it's very touching. I mean, this is real. This is not a copy, or this is real.
Yeah.
And when the war ended, he kept all the postcards, and I have all of them. It's a huge collection. I mean, it's
Yes.
like 20 of them that we have in the shop.
So you've got a whole set of these postcards that came from a collection of books.
Yeah.
So, and is this also, I think if I'm remembering correctly, there's a kind of mirroring in this particular book
Yes,
collection.
because that man later became a philosophy professor, and we bought his collection of books, and it was weird because he used to buy 2 copies for each book, one for study, so they were annotated, read. I mean, they were experienced. I don't know how to say better. And the other copy was clean, perfect, like new. So it was a twin collection. For every book, he held 2 copies.
Wow. And so when you purchased all the books, in the books there was
Yeah.
total mirror set.
Yeah.
The annotated copy, all marked
Yeah,
up. And I assume these were in the marked up copies.
Yeah. And I imagined that was because he and his wife were separated, and he was torn apart, and she was clean and new and ready for a new life.
Well, in a moment, before we move into the next set of images, we want to give it a bit of space here for our audience in the radio theater here at Chapel FM. Just curious, if anybody has stumbled upon anything memorable in a used book in anyone's experience. So I'll give you a moment or two to think about it, but if anybody has even the kind of an object that you maybe have come across in a book someplace, somewhere along the way, we would love to hear. We'll look one more image, and then we'll see if we've got anybody out there that has an example to share of this sort of resurrected book. I have one, actually, an interesting. So I'll quickly say there's a mural in town, which I can show you later on, a really fantastic mural right next to the corn exchange of this kind of, it's almost like a Soviet realist mural of all these workers, and there's a woman with her sleeves rolled up, and it's really beautiful, and I've always loved it and all that, and it's got an artist's name on it, and I should remember the artist's name now. And literally about a month ago, I bought a book of poems from the Oxfam, not far from where I live on Otley Road, Miroslav Holub, the Czech poet. And inside there was this great dedication that it was the property of artist so-and-so, and it had this really lovely calligraphy handwriting on it. And I was like, oh, that's great. Who's this artist? I'll look up the artist. And I looked up the artist, and it was a Leeds artist, and it was immediately popped up that image of that mural that I've been admiring for the last 5 years in town. So there's just something quite nice, very simple example, but of this Czech poet who I quite like, bringing home this book and immediately realizing, oh, that book belonged to the mural artist whose mural I've been enjoying, that I see every day on my way back and forth to Chapel FM Art Center. So now when I look at that mural, just suddenly having that strange connection between, and I now have that sense of the name of the artist, which was up there on the mural all along, but I never really paid attention to it, but now I've noticed it, and it kind of locked these 2 things in place. So, I mean, it gives me the thought of this idea of the memory, the concept of the memory palace as well, this kind of association that people make in their brains of linking these objects and memories. Does anyone else have an object found in a book along the way? Including, oh, okay, Tallulah, maybe Jake's got one. We'll hear a couple of examples of things that.
I found an inscription in this book called Surpassing the Love of Men, which was really sweet. And the inscription was, surpassable as it may be, it's still all my love, Phil.
Mine's an inscription as well, actually. I bought a second-hand copy of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, and the inscription in the front was a birthday inscription. It said, "Happy birthday to Victoria. Happy birthday. Read soon and let's discuss." This copy of Infinite Jest had an uncracked spine. It had never been opened. so clearly Infinite Jest is a gift that you buy somebody if you want them to stop being your friend.
Christopher has made a program about David Foster Wallace and his it's a meditation on his relationship with the book. That's on the Sunday morning, a little plug.
Tomorrow morning,
Writing on
fantastic.
Air,
Well,
tomorrow morning.
it's all connected here at Chapel FM and the Writing on Air Festival. Things flow together like that. And Peter, have you had any interesting book object finds? Yeah.
Really lovely, I can't remember what book it was in, but it was a postcard from the First World War. And it was, I think it just had, see you on Friday, and that was all the writing that was on it. But the actual picture was of a woman standing on the shore. It must have been on the Dover, looking over towards France and kind of waving towards the battlefields, I suppose. I find that very poignant.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, in the last year or two, I've started leaving objects, little things in books with the notion that I'm seeding them for whoever might discover them in the future. So I feel like this might be a growing obsession as I get older in life. I might start putting all kinds of things in books and for my own pleasure. Okay, so here's a fourth image. Okay, so now we've got some more writing. We've got this from 1988. Okay.
But this is terrible. It took me like 6 months
to
understand what is writing.
I can't make out much of it. This is in Italian as well. So Giovanni's going to take us through what's going on in this thing here from Augusto.
This guy Augusto, he says, 40 years ago we were leaving for a love trip, and our thoughts were light as birds. And then he goes on and says, my heart is devastated and my mind is cracked, but my heart still loves you. And that was very moving to me because I found it as I told you, in a Jean Genet book, which on the contrary is very violent. He's very sexual.
This is the French writer who writes a lot about prisoners and prostitutes and male prostitutes and all kinds of things. Yeah.
On the opposite, this is very delicate and sweet.
And that first sentence again from Por Agosto is, say that again, let's paraphrase that again. I'm going on a long trip.
We're going on a long trip 40 years ago, and our thoughts were light as birds.
Our thoughts were light as birds, from Augusto. Okay. All right. So let's get on to next image here. Okay. So photograph. Now I should say you've got a whole wall of these objects and images, by the way, in the bookstore.
It's in the book.
And in a moment, we'll come to the book here.
If you remove the cover.
Yes. Okay. Well, you're talking. I'll remove the cover so we can even share it around with our studio audience. Those of you listening in at home, you can see all the images on the site for the book. So this is a good example of radio as theater of the mind. So for those who can't see this image, let's paint this picture for them here a bit. So here you go. I'll let you give a start at it, and I'll jump in with some details.
Okay, it's Piazza della Signoria in Florence, and there's a small crowd of people in front of a puppet theater. But there are two main figures in the picture: a girl with a small boy, and a guy with mustache. I always thought he was some kind of a German guy and a hippie guy, if you look at him.
Yeah.
And it's strange because he's looking at the theater, she's not looking, and everybody's looking at the theater, but at the same time there's the glance of the girl exactly at the center of the picture, which blows away the whole scene. And it's a beautiful picture. I think it was taken around 67, 68 maybe. And I had also of this a huge collection. I have like 20 of these pictures. And I found them in a philosophy book, but I don't remember what book it was. I do remember the collection. But I mean, by the way, it's a beautiful picture.
When I said the sort of the German-looking guy with the shaggy hair and the beard, whose shirt's kind of halfway open as well, I sort of had the sense that, like, you know, I don't know, maybe the young woman in the front was they had a romance 5 years ago and they hadn't seen her and he's come to track her down.
I don't think so.
No, okay, imagine it. Okay. Well, anyway, this is how these things can sort of, you can fill in the stories here. You don't think so? Okay. I think okay.
And the other guy, that child holding this giant cigarette. You see that?
It's a giant cigarette. Very good. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. And this one, I think, will launch us into the sort of a kind of an open conclusion here, because this one has, I think this really embodies the kind of the story that is waiting to be unpacked, or that the imagination can run with. So we've got this very sort of neat, very regular, very meticulous handwriting written to someone named Damiano, right? And this is Christmas, Natale, it's Christmas in Italian, 1974, and it's written, well, should we say who it's from at the bottom, and then we'll translate the message, or say that to the end?
In the end.
Okay, let's take us through this message and what's being said here. It's being delivered to Damiano on Christmas Day.
It goes, Dear Damiano, I received your first request, the Bontempi organ. It was an electric organ which was very popular in the 80s and 70s and 80s. It was an organ for kids.
Okay. Keyboard or an organ, okay.
Yeah.
Kids, okay.
And he said, okay, that organ Bontempi, because it's still the best, that kind of organ.
Today, okay.
I didn't take your money because my gifts are paid with a good heart and not with money. I know you've been quite good, and that after all, you will be in the future, so you will deserve my judgment. Yours, baby Jesus.
Okay, so Damiano wanted his organ, he got his organ, but okay.
But the funny thing is that Jesus knows that the Bontempi organ is still the best.
Very.
That's great. Not Jesus, baby Jesus knows it.
Yes, baby Jesus to Damiano. So, and you had, so let's just take this one to kind of riff with now as we get on, and we'll come to the book a little more in a moment here. But yeah, in reading this one, so just giving this example. So when you're unpacking books and finding these objects like that, and then eventually assembling them on the wall into this collection, this museum of relics and things like this. So the associations, the kind of the
well, this was a sad story, actually, because we went into the house of this woman, if I remember correctly, and this kid, Damiano, was he died like in 1975 or 6, and she kept everything from him.
And she told you that he had died,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a cancer, I think.
Yeah.
And also an old, one of the first Macintosh computers, which was still unpacked because he died before. And every time I find those kind of things, I mean, it's very emotional to me, because it's some kind of, as I told you before, it's some kind of time machine. I mean, you, in this case, and also in the others, you have access to the life, to the previous life of people. And it's a privilege. I mean, not many workers can have the privilege, but we have that, and that's an honor to me.
Well, let's come to the book then. So, so you've been doing having these experiences, going into other people's lives, finding these objects, bringing back, recovering books, trying to bring them back out into the world in a society that puts so much value on brand new books and the rest of sort of things, but the mystery, the mystique, the aura that go with used books. So how did this this process start then of taking those experiences and transforming them into this? And what were you hoping to do with the book?
It was. I just started writing those stories because I didn't want to forget them.
Yeah.
And after years, I realized that I had lots of them. And then the publisher came to me and said, I've read some of those stories on an online magazine.
Yeah.
Do you have a book? Is that a book? And I said, no, it's not a book. Okay, let's do it. And we did it. And it was a terrible experience because you deal with death and pain, but at the same time, it reminds me that we're doing a really good job with memories and the life of other people and the pain of other people, and also the relief of pain. Because when people sell their books or the books of their dead relatives, you take away their pain most of the time, and that's kind of a cure in a sense. And I mean, I really love my job, and even when it's hard and when it's painful, but I do love it.
Well, we love to hear lots of different, not just different voices here on East Leeds Community Radio, but it's good to sometimes hear another language for a little bit. So I thought if I pass you along your book, it's in Italian, but there's a short passage or two, or one short passage maybe, that we'll just hear it just a minute or so in the original Italian. Lovely to hear a bit, and then we can summarize it in English and talk about it. So,
I will read the last chapter.
Okay.
It's called Zum Ende, which in German means let's finish.
Let's finish.
Okay. And it goes: Oggi sono solo, dice l'oggetto, dunque sono indistruttibile. Non ricordo dove ho letto questa frase, ma per me al contrario, questa solitudine di oggi corrisponde esattamente all'essere perfettamente distruttibile, devastabile, annientabile. Sono solo oggi, in una giornata che non si decide tra la pioggia e il sole, tra l'autunno e il caldo che invece tutti si aspettano. Entra il Corriere, parliamo un po' come al solito. Ci lasciamo sempre andare alle reciproche passioni, giusto perché possa prendere fiato ogni tanto anche lui. Parliamo quindi di libri e di musica, quella che ascolto al momento. Parliamo di altri negozi, di altri negozianti che spesso gli stanno antipatici perché nemmeno lo degnano di uno sguardo quando entra coi pacchi. Poi a volte ci intratteniamo con i clienti al momento e lui partecipa per qualche minuto, soddisfatto. Una costante di questo rapporto interlocutorio è che lui ogni volta lascia la porta aperta uscendo, anche oggi. E ora vado a chiuderla.
Okay, and just to give our listeners a sense of what's going on in that passage, so...
This is the delivery guy who comes to deliver something. And we talk about books and music and stuff of other shops. And he always leaves the door open when he goes out. And the last sentence says, now I go and close it, which is the last sentence of the book. Spoiler.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of those books that it's okay to find out how it ends. So I want to touch on one other aspect of recovery in relation to your work and books, and in particular, this particular, and then a little bit of time before we close in about under 10 minutes now, about 7-8 minutes or so, a little time for maybe a question or two from the audience, if there is one out there. Questions, not audiences. We know there's audiences here in the room and all around the world, and of course listening in the archives in the future as well. So we love how specific different literature scenes and literature is in different places around the world. We've done a lot of exploring that here over the past weeks and over the last year about the literature world in Yorkshire, and especially Seacroft and East Leeds. And in this particular part of Italy where Reggio sits is called Emilia-Romagna. It's a province. It's just north, to give people a quick sense, a little north of Tuscany and Florence, a little south of Milan, kind of up towards the top third of Italy or so, where the River Po flows along. And it's a very foggy, sometimes, especially this time of year, it gets quite foggy. People might not think of Italy as being foggy, but the Pianura Padana is full of this thick fog. And there's a sense that a lot of the literature and the writing from that part of Italy is that sense of the fog and the confusion, and there's a lot of playing with the idea of madness and reason and losing your reason. And I've certainly noticed, getting to know it over the years, writers love to play with these ideas of just getting lost in the fog and the confusion and people looking for the way forward out of it all. But one of the books that is from that part of Italy that goes back 500 years now, just had its 500th anniversary, is a book called Orlando Furioso, which is this story of all these knights fighting with the non-Christians, and it's this very fantastical book, and it includes journeys to the moon and traveling all around the world. But the crux of the whole story, in some ways, is that the main character Orlando, the person whose book the book is named for, has lost his reason at a certain point of time due to love for this woman, Angelica, and other reasons. And in the mythology of the story, everything that's lost on Earth finds its way by some strange kind of physical process, migrates up to the moon and ends up trapped on the moon inside little glass jars where it's just kind of locked away. And so Orlando's friend, Astolfo, in order to get his friend's reason back so he can come back and join the struggle and get back to being a knight and doing all the things that knights need to do, he rides a flying horse, a winged horse, a hippogriff to the moon in order to recover Orlando's reason lost on the moon in one of these little jars. And there's a fantastic passage where he lands on the moon and sees all the lost things on Earth that have vanished, that need to perhaps be recovered, strewn around the moon in all this way, and then eventually he finds Orlando's reason, gets back on the flying horse, and brings it back, and the story continues on. So it gives you a quick sense of what Orlando Furioso, what kind of strange book it's like. But this is a roundabout way of saying, does that somehow embody something about the world that you're in and the role that books play in Emilia-Romagna, this kind of this strange pursuit of looking for lost reason in a chaotic world in the midst of the fog and chaos and recovered objects, recovered things?
The literature from our region is full of crazy people.
Yeah.
People who lost their minds, like Orlando.
Yeah.
Maybe because of the fog, as you said.
Yeah.
Or maybe because of this continued plane. You know, there's no difference between a town and another in this whole plain, which is very depressing. And you put plain and fog together, then you have madness for sure. Yeah. And writers like Gianni Celati or Daniele Benati or Ermanno Cavazzoni, which is the new school from the 50s on in the 20th century, they always write about madness or getting lost in life for some reason. And the landscape is a very important part of their writing. And Gianni Celati used to work with the great photographer Luigi Ghirri. And in a way, he invented the way to photograph the fog. And if you see his pictures, in some of them, you don't see anything at all. You just see a white wall and maybe something, just a silhouette of something, and you don't know what it is. It could be a human figure or a building or a car. And that's very interesting to me because it gives to those kind of artists a dimension of sadness, but not despair. It's very sad and melancholic, but not despair. And I really like those writers, and Gianni Celati is one of my favorite, and I recommend it to you all.
And so in your work of bringing books back to life, resurrecting books, but also the objects in the books and telling the stories about them, seems like there's a connection between that and this wider mood of literature in this particular part of Italy, to me. A kind of
yeah, because if you were born and raised there, you breathe it.
Yeah,
you feel it. It's normal to think about life that way. So it was easy for me to create a connection with those kind of writers and artists.
Well, thank you for joining us in this discussion about the Museum of Relics and bringing a few of the relics with you. We'll
thank you
think about Port Damiano and that last message, but again, just a small sampling of the things and many stories about some of these objects and the books themselves in this. So before we finish it off, Any closing thought? You've chosen a piece of music as well, and maybe
Yeah, I chose
why you chose that piece of music to end with.
I chose a song by Bob Dylan. It's called Just Like Tom Thumb's Blues. Since I'm a huge fan of Dylan, like Gianni Celati and all the other writers. And I want to finish with a quote by Dylan from another song, which is Murder Most Foul. And at one point he says, "I hate to tell you, mister, but only dead men are free." And since we spoke about death and being resurrected, I thought it was a good sentence to end this conversation.
Well, very good.
So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you to our studio audience for Giovanni. And we'll hear some Bob Dylan before we move on to the next. We've got Fortified Spirits coming up next. Okay, here we go. Sorry, Peter. Thank you.